Could someone just give me a quick indication in the chat if you can see my PowerPoint here, or a thumbs up on the screen? Okay, thank you so much. We're going to wait for everybody to jump on. I just wanted to introduce myself. My name is Kate, and we're going to go ahead and get started promptly at 9, but we'll give folks 8 minutes or so to jump in. Thank you for being here, and thank you for being early.
Hi, Kate.
Hi, good morning. I was on mute. How are you?
Yeah.
Good.
There we go.
We'll give people a few more minutes to sign on with us.
Okay, so how many did you wind up with altogether?
We had quite a few RSVPs, so I'm hopeful. Hopefully we have a lot of people come in. And we have a few early birds, which I love.
Yes.
That we have some people already on, so we're excited. We'll get started in just a moment.
Okay. And we'll start with me introducing you, right?
Yep. So you'll kick us off if you don't mind.
Not at all. So should I say that PASS is part of BoardWorks?
Yes, you're welcome. Yeah, to say that. And actually, John, who you may have met before, I believe you have, he's on the call today.
Hey, Addie, how are you?
Hi, John. How are you doing?
I'm doing well, thanks. How have you been these last few months?
Well, unfortunately, I wound up getting COVID, so it's been a little bit rough, but I am fine now.
So you are recovered?
I am recovered.
Strong as
steel. Thank God.
That's awesome.
And I had a pretty mild case also, so that worked well too.
Well, that is great to hear that you are recovered. It doesn't sound fun.
No, it's not.
What was it like? Was it like flu symptoms? Was it like a respiratory?
It's a little of both, but I didn't have the breathing issues, and my temperature only lasted for a couple of days. And so that made it a lot better. Some of my friends have had it really bad. But my worst was the nausea, and I did lose my sense of taste and smell, which is now beginning to come back.
Yeah. Wow.
So that's good. Yeah. But it's nice to see you. I assume you've been healthy?
I think so. I think so. I mean, I think I've been healthy. So you know where I live. I live just outside of Philadelphia, so we've just been home a lot.
Good.
So it's been interesting working and then having 3 kids who are school age, but that's kind of the deal for everybody across the country right now, right?
Right. Absolutely. Yeah, they just decided in our county or my former county, to go all virtual for the first semester.
Was that Charles?
Howard
County. Okay, so huge district.
Yeah.
Huge district. Yeah. So where are you located right now? Are you in Baltimore or DC metro?
Actually, as soon as this hit, I came down to my beach house in Delaware.
Nice.
And I had knee replacement surgery. So since March, I've seen 2 people, my physical therapist and my husband, and it was my therapist who gave it to me. Unfortunately.
Oh my word.
I have been in phase 1 since March.
Yeah.
And I'm one of those people with that dumb luck, and I decided to go one place.
Oh my goodness. So where is beach house for you? Is that Rehoboth? Oh, I love Rehoboth.
Oh my God, it's great here. And what a great place to be quarantined. Like I said, I don't go out anywhere, but the fact that our neighborhood is just 32 little homes on a horseshoe, and it's quiet. So I can walk around, we garden, I couldn't have done any of that at home in Columbia. So.
Okay, yeah. Do you go to the beach at all?
No, staying away from that they're not wearing masks, they're gathering, it's a lot of young people. So, and especially now I'm gun shy. I don't want to be around anyone but people I totally trust.
Yeah. Well, I guess I won't bring my wife and 3 kids down to visit you anytime soon.
No, please don't. I'd say stay home. It's not worth it. My physical therapist was asymptomatic, but he had been with friends one of whom got it. And my guess is, he was a young guy. My guess is they probably socialized without masks. He didn't say that, but I have that sense. And then, wound up giving it to me. So it's just scary. I tell people stay home. That's Jonathan, my best advice.
Debbie O'Byrne, where do I live outside of Philadelphia? Your daughter is going to St. Joseph in the fall. So I live in Collegeville. So if you know where King of Prussia Mall is, I live 10 minutes from there and probably about 25 minutes from St. Joseph's. Love that mall. Yeah. I love that mall too. and my daughter loves that mall, and my wife loves that mall. We all, yeah.
Maybe too much love for the mall.
Yeah, it's a little dangerous there.
And shopping in general.
Yeah.
Jonathan, I grew up in the Lehigh Valley, Pennsylvania.
Oh, where at?
Emmaus, Pennsylvania.
Well, my younger brother, who works for Boardworks, our company, he lives in Macungie.
That's where I grew up, in Macungie.
Yeah, he was a former teacher at East Penn.
I went to East Penn School District. I graduated from Emmaus High School.
That is awesome.
Oh, world.
That is awesome.
If I said Macungie, I thought you wouldn't know it because it sounds like a fungus, so I didn't want to say Macungie, so I said Emmaus.
So let me just ask a question. You graduated from East Penn. Just give me a ballpark timeline. When?
A long time ago.
So long time ago, 90s, 80s, or 70s?
I graduated in the late 80s, yes.
Okay, in the late 80s. Okay, there you go. I was going to say my uncle, he graduated from there as well, but that was long before you.
Great school system.
Yeah, it is. It's really good. He really liked teaching there. I mean, we say it's great, then he left there to work here, but that's all right.
You can't compare Pennsylvania. I live in Maryland now, and the pensions are far different in Pennsylvania than Maryland.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Better known, but I was going out to see the bigger and better, bigger world in Macungie, so I left Macungie.
Have you seen it recently?
What, Macungie?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, my mom still lives in the Macungie Park.
Okay, great. Yeah, where he lives like, how it's all built up with the Whole Foods there and things like that.
Yes.
Yeah, he lives right by there, the movie tavern, the Whole Foods.
I go to the Nordstrom Rack every time I'm home there because there isn't tax on clothing.
Yeah, we were just there. But yeah, that's awesome. We're going up Sunday night.
Yeah, wow. Small world, Jonathan.
It is. Yeah, I was raised in Lancaster, PA, but when I was an adult, my parents moved up to Quakertown. So
yep, I know, that was our rival in high school, one of them.
Quakertown?
Yeah, Quakertown.
Yeah. But kind of where I live now is not where I grew up. If anyone knows Amish country, that is home for me.
Wow. What a small world. I should start saying Macungie because I don't say Macungie because I'm like, nobody's going to know where Macungie is.
You know what? So I always say just generally Philadelphia. And then a lot of times, no matter who I talk to across the country, like, well, where? And it's always like, well, I have friends who live in Newton Square. Or I'm like, okay, cool. We know.
Yeah. Small world.
Yeah.
Well, tell your brother that you met a fellow Macungieite.
I will certainly. I'm going to be talking to him after this. Yeah.
Well, let's go ahead and get started. Addie, would you mind kicking off?
Not at all. Good morning, everybody, and thank you for joining us today. MASSP is very proud to work with PASS, which is also part of Boardworks. Kate and I have spent a lot of time talking about the needs of schools and administrators as we left virtual learning and in many districts will continue virtual learning, and the ways in which we can incorporate social emotional learning into everything that we're doing, because we know it's something that kids need. A little bit about Kate. She started her career in education through the Teach for America program and did that in Charlotte at the largest Title I elementary school there. She was also a Girls on the Run coach, which I just love. I think that's a great program. And that sparked her passion for social, emotional well-being and learning. And at that point, she moved to New York City, continued to teach, became an instructional coach. And with her very deep passion for social, emotional learning, she decided to start working and become a consultant, for PASS. And we've just had some phenomenal conversations. I think this program is great and easy to do, whether it's a virtual year or an in-school or hybrid year. So with that, take it away, Kate.
Thank you so much, Addie, for that warm introduction. We are just really excited to be with you today, and we want to thank you first and foremost for your time. So the majority of you are principals that are on this webinar with us today, or assistant principals. We have a couple of teachers and other folks who were invited to the webinar as well, and we're so happy to have you, and thank you for taking the time, especially as you are so busy trying to plan for these various scenarios that might happen next school year. So we just really appreciate your time. Some quick logistics. I think the majority of you are on mute, which is fine. There's quite a few of us, so typically being on mute makes it a little easier to hear the speaker, which for the most part will be me throughout the day. but feel free to utilize, I know some folks have already started utilizing the chat. I actually have a couple of colleagues who are on the webinar with us today. John, who you might have heard from, he's our Pennsylvania rep here. John's on with us, and then I also have my manager, Charlotte, who's on the call. And so they will be answering your chat and pinging me if there's anything that I need to address, as well as the speaker. So with that, we're going to go ahead and get started with our presentation, which is uncovering student social and emotional barriers to learning. Oop. And my screen is, of course, frozen. What's going on? Oh, there we go. Okay, so here's our agenda. This is what we're going to go through today in just our short time together. We only have about an hour. So first and foremost, I'm just going to kind of talk through some objectives that we have overall. We're going to actually talk about what is a social and emotional barrier to learning. That may not have been a term that you've heard before in the SEL realm. So we're going to actually talk a little bit about how we define those at PASS. We're also going to talk through the importance of assessment and just having a way, especially after school closure, to check in with your students on their social and emotional well-being and to really see if there are any of those barriers to learning, which we're going to, of course, address and define. And then last but not least, we want to equip you with some strategies, some really practical things that you can walk away with and be thinking about as you're planning for the next school year. At the end, we'll talk a little bit about specifically what PASS is. We're an assessment company, so we'll talk a little bit about that, just a couple of slides on that. And we'll close out with a Q&A, which we'll utilize the chat for, and if folks want to come off mute towards the end of the call, that's fine too. We're also recording this today, so I plan to send out the recording. So if you have any colleagues that missed out today, feel free to share that recording with them. We'll do that at the end, or I'll send that over at the end. And last but not least, I want to just, Addie kind of already alluded to it, but I want to address the elephant in the room, which is that many of us actually don't know what the plan is for our county right now. I was just kind of doing a quick Google search, and I've been trying to pay attention to the news in Maryland throughout the week, just because I know I was going to have this audience of wonderful educators in Maryland. And I know that we don't quite know what school is going to look like in the fall, or perhaps we have a hunch, but it could change. And so you'll hear me say this new normal a lot. You'll hear me say, you know, that perhaps we'll have a hybrid model where we're in person, but also doing some remote work. And, you know, there may be some anxiety around that. So I just wanted to name that before we're going into the presentation, that there's a lot of unknowns still. And I can appreciate just that you're here today still thinking about these things for your students, even with those unknowns. So thank you so much for that. And with that, let's go ahead and jump in. So first and foremost, just like I said, we're going to actually talk about what is a barrier to learning first, and specifically a social and emotional barrier to learning. And we're going to kind of first just talk about these in the general context of school in a normal school year, if we can remember what that looks like. So we'll talk about these three different things at PASS that we really prioritize, which is connectedness, self-advocacy, and motivation. So I'm going to start off with connectedness and just talk a little bit about how this affects our students in a normal school year. So connectedness, how do we define this? This is the student's sense of belonging and how they feel generally about their learning environment. So this is going to, you know, encompass things like the school culture, the school climate, how do students feel about the school rules? It's also going to talk about relationships. So do students have a strong relationship with their peer group? Do they have strong relationships with their teacher, which we know is so important as far as investing students in the idea of school and being motivated at school? How they feel about their teachers, so much a part of that. And last but not least, in this area of connectedness, we're also going to talk through attendance and how students feel about actually just coming to school every day. Are they motivated? Do they see school as a vital part of their life? So that is our connectedness barrier. Next, we're going to move over to self-efficacy. So here, this is really getting at how students see themselves as a learner. So this is going to incorporate kind of a lot, but we'll start with just, you know, do students have a love of learning? Do they have feelings of success in the classroom? Do they have the skills and the background knowledge that they need to be a successful student, or to feel like they are, or they can be a successful student? It's also going to talk a little bit about growth mindset and confidence, which I know are big buzzwords right now. But at the end of the day, what that means is we don't want our students to say about themselves, I'm bad at math, or I'm not a good student. we don't want them to ever feel like they're permanently not good at anything, right? We want them to think, if I work hard, if I work with my teachers and my peers, I can get better at something over time. And really having that growth mindset about themselves. So overall, self-efficacy really leads to a student's long-term sense of self-worth. So it's really important, and we know that. Next is motivation. So when we think about motivation, we're actually thinking about it in a short-term way and also a long-term way. So here, the short term, we're thinking about how do students respond to the curriculum? Do they feel like the curriculum is too rigorous, too challenging? Do they feel like the curriculum is not challenging enough? We've had students report to us, I don't feel like school's difficult enough. I'm not challenged at school. So we really want to make sure that we're kind of finding that just right area of proximal development. We also want to make sure students see themselves in the curriculum, that it's culturally responsive, that they feel connected to what they're learning about. And then when we think about long-term motivation for our students, we want to think about, do they have goals, outside of school? Do they know what they want to be when they grow up? And do they see school as helping them to achieve those goals? So these are what we'll refer to throughout the presentation as social and emotional barriers to learning. And of course, when we get the supports in these three categories right, our students can fly, our students can achieve. And that's ultimately what we want, right? For them to be successful in and out of the classroom. But our whole world has been rocked by coronavirus. I think you all have had to be some of the most adaptable people because school had to go on. The show must go on, so to speak. So kudos to you all for being able to adapt quickly and get your students technology and all of the various things that you had to do to kind of just turn school on its head and be able to support your students. And for some students, the effects of school closure, perhaps they're a more independent learner, perhaps they're an introvert, maybe they're really close with their family and enjoyed their time at home. But for a lot of our students, school closure may have negatively affected some of these social and emotional barriers to learning. And here we're going to kind of talk through what that might look like, right? So with connectedness, we're thinking about a couple of things here. The relationship aspect of school. So students didn't have that support from their teacher, at least the in-person support that, is really necessary to help our students learn most of the time, or for most students. They didn't have the chance to socialize with their peers. For many of our kids, they also had a lack of routine. I know my niece was in high school and she was staying up so late and really, somewhat kind of abusing her time of school closure and not kind of keeping that same routine that she was having before. So for many of our kids, when we think about them coming back, we're going to be thinking about how can we regain that connection and how can we help them get kind of back on track with having a normal routine again. Next, when we think about self-efficacy, students may have had a really hard time and really struggled to learn independently, which can lead to that dip in confidence. And, like I said, we weren't around to support our students and help coach them with that growth mindset that's so important to lead to a strong sense of self as a student. And last but not least, motivation. When we think about students not being able to do some of those really dynamic content activities that you can do in person, like a science experiment or a field trip, or some students are very motivated by their extracurricular activities. So students just haven't had some of those in-person things, which can lead to, a dip in motivation as well. And of course, all of this is underpinned by just general anxiety, right? We're worried about how to keep our kids safe. Our kids are worried about how to keep themselves safe in this new normal. And so, we definitely want to recognize that just in general, having a global pandemic is something that can affect our students when they come back to us. Certainly, I know it's affected the adults as well. And last but not least, I want to name that, we also had a lot of racial unrest over the past several months in our country. And usually school is that safe space where you can come and talk to your teacher, or you can talk to your coach or your peers and kind of process some of the images that we're seeing in our current events and in our news. And students haven't had that in-person time. So they're also going to be coming back to us with that. And that's heavy, right? So we want to be thoughtful as we're planning for how to address all of these things, which is a lot. So I'm going to pause for a minute, and I'd love for you all to utilize the chat when we're thinking about these three categories that we just went over: connectedness and self-efficacy and motivation. Which of these is the biggest concern for you when thinking about your students returning to school? So if you could just share in the chat: connectedness, motivation, self-efficacy. And thanks, John, for adding that. Marie shared motivation.
Motivation, motivation, motivation. Lots of motivations here.
Yeah.
Yeah. If it if anyone is comfortable just expanding upon that a little bit, I know it could be awkward because there's a lot of people on here, but if there's a lot of motivations in here, if one person just wants to expand upon your thoughts behind that, I think that'll be really helpful for everyone to hear. Connectedness, which will affect motivation. You're right.
Yeah, I think to Wendy's point, John, you know, they all are intertwined, right? How connected we feel to school can affect things like confidence, can affect things like motivation.
Yep. Self-efficacy, which will link to the other two. It's what Debbie says. Connectedness.
And sorry,
all three.
If you just heard a dog bark in the background, that was my sister's dog.
Jennifer Gilman says connectedness. Jennifer Gilman, hello, Hollywood Elementary.
Some old friends. Kim shared, our students are craving that peer and teacher connection, and I feel that this will be a huge positive to returning. Yeah, absolutely. And so here, really what we're just trying to get you to think about, and I appreciate all of you chiming in with the chat, what we're trying to get you to think about is, as we plan, whichever of these feels the most important or the most pressing, they're all important. And we're going to give you strategies to actually start to address all three of these. But whichever is the most important to you and to your staff and students, really keeping that in the forefront of how you plan. So even thinking through some of those operations and logistics of what does our school day look like and our scheduling, down to the curriculum choices that you're in the midst of making, all of those things. When you're thinking about which one of these barriers is important to you, important to your staff, important to your students, really going in with that mindset of how can I utilize, you know, planning for back to school to make my students feel more connected? How can I help really build up that self-efficacy in my students and staff? How can I help with the motivation, whatever it may be, keeping that top of mind.
And sorry, Kate, to add to that, Shelley, thank you for giving your personal story. And Kate and I have been working with a lot of schools, and that connectedness piece, we've been speaking to schools and just trying to encourage gaining that connection before we push anything else. And I think you're right, it's very important to have that connection to your teachers and your peers so you can really start working towards that self-efficacy and motivation.
Thanks, Charlotte. And that is why this is not a one-woman show, because I needed my colleagues here to pay attention to the chat for me. Thank you so much for bringing that up. Okay, so we're going to move along, and here we're going to really start to think about, what do we do? You know, we've talked about the barriers. We've talked about how COVID and school closure have affected the barriers. And now we're going to start to talk to you a little bit about, you know, how to move forward with planning. And so we at GL, which is our parent company, we're actually the largest assessment company in the UK. And so our overall company works with schools around the world, actually. And then, of course, our work here in the US as well. And we have a wide array of assessments. We have cognitive assessments, social and emotional learning assessments like PASS. And we're hearing from our partners that they are very concerned about the loss of learning for their students. They want a way to check in on them academically so that they can start to catch them up as quickly as possible. So they're thinking with reading, with math, how do we, you know, assess them quickly and then start to address some of those gaps that they're predicting they'll have, that their students will have. But we're also seeing an emphasis throughout the summer, especially as we start to inch closer to the school year starting. We're starting to see the emphasis on, man, we need to start with social and emotional learning. We need to start with checking in on our students' overall well-being. And especially we're seeing that with our US, you know, district and school partners, that they are very concerned about how their students are just feeling overall. And so there's lots of different ways we could check in with our students, right? We could sit down with all of them one-on-one in a perfect world if we had enough time and capacity. But a lot of us have too many students in the building to be able to have that level of one-on-one support. We can use our anecdotal observations and use kind of some of our background knowledge from how school closure went and remote learning went. But there's going to be students who fall through the cracks. And so really what we're recommending here is starting with a universal screener. And basically what a universal screener is, it's every grade level, and you're giving the opportunity to check in with all of your students in an efficient and effective way so that none of those students are slipping through the cracks. And ultimately, we want to know, and be able to prioritize which students really need support in these areas. And then how do we support them? What do they specifically need support with? So when we're thinking about supporting our students with social and emotional, well-being, overall, we want to be proactive and not reactive. And we feel like a universal screener allows you to be able to do that. And before we jump into strategies to help support your students, we want to name that, you kind of have to start at the adult level here. So I'm going to talk to you about one of my favorite metaphors, which is teachers as flight attendants of our school. So when you're on a flight and there's turbulence, you start to feel nervous, right? And maybe you start to get that worried look on your eyes like, oh no, what's going to happen? And then you look up and there's a flight attendant and he or she is smiling and serving peanuts and serving Diet Coke, and you think, okay, well, they're on planes all the time. And if they're not bothered by this turbulence and able to still do their jobs in a happy way, then maybe, we're going to be okay. This plane's going to land. And teachers are that for our students, right? They're the ones that are really on the front lines. And if they are feeling worried and anxious, visibly, then that will trickle down to the student level, absolutely. But we also know that vice versa is true. If teachers feel valued, if they feel supported, if they feel heard, those types of things that we want our staff members to be able to feel, then that trickles down to, and that sends a message to your student population that everything's going to be okay. And so here we're really thinking about ways in which we can support our staff. So really having a check-in with your staff members before returning. And you may not have capacity to sit down one-on-one, like we said, with every student, but trying to really reach out and have a one-on-one conversation with everyone on your staff team, I think is really important, just to ensure, like I said, that they're feeling confident, that they're feeling valued in the plan for starting school up again. And then also having a feedback loop. I'm sure that during those few months that we had of school closure in the spring, that really the teachers were a vital part of that and giving guidance on how to move forward. So having a way, having a monthly or what have you way of getting their feedback so that you can ensure that you're course correcting. There's going to be some unknowns, there's going to be things that we just couldn't plan for, and having a way to loop in your staff is really important. So here we're going to start to talk through how to actually address some of these barriers to learning with the mindset of returning to school, whatever that may be, whether it is virtual, whether it is the hybrid model. I don't think I've heard of any district that right now is going back completely normal, but we want to equip you with just some thoughts to get you started with how to actually plan for the return. So when we think about connectedness in a normal school year, we know, and this was actually mentioned in the chat, that it does lead to academic success. If students have pride in their school, if they have those strong relationships, they are going to be more academically successful. There's been a lot of studies on this idea of connection. And it's going to be more important ever than to reestablish that with our kids when they come back. So first, we're going to talk through a couple of ways to create safe connections. So first and foremost, we're going to talk about relationships for a second. Our normal day-to-day lives, when students would reunite after summertime, they would go run up and give their best friend a hug. They would go run up and high-five their favorite teacher or coach. And now we have the 6 feet social distancing that we're all trying to navigate, right? And we want to make sure that our students have a new way of greeting us and, a way that makes them still feel like they're part of a safe place and that this is still a warm, loving environment for them to come to school every day. So whether or not it's something as simple as a peace sign, just making a really explicit way to set that boundary with students, but to do it in a way where they still feel like, okay, I still get to greet and see my friends and my teachers again. I know many people have been doing this or kind of kicking their leg up at folks instead of hugging or shaking hands. And we want to just set a way to do that. Like I said, that's kind of almost like a routine, teaching a new routine on how to greet one another. So that's the relationship side of creating a safe connection. We also want to create a connection around academics as well. we can't get rid of group work. And you know, the thing is that in the real world, students need to be able to work as a team. They need to be able to build relationships in their jobs. They will have people that they have to work with to accomplish tasks. So we want to continue to have group work, but we need to think about how we can do this differently. Now that we are, you know, not able to sit at a table together or sit side by side at two different desks. I know my niece, I was asking her a little bit about how school closure went for her, and she shared that the learning management system Canvas was kind of a game changer. She was like, the teachers can actually read all of our messages, which she of course didn't like, but I was like, as an adult, I thought that was great. So you're ensuring that, you know, everything is appropriate, but that was a way for the students to connect and work together on different documents. Or if students are back in the classroom, you know, even if they're at desks by themselves, can they have a one-to-one device? How can we maximize the technology so that they can still collaborate with one another on documents and still work together on projects? So we don't want to scrap group work. We just got to get creative in how we achieve that with our students. And next, we want to talk about new routines. And this is probably already on your radar, but if students do come back into the building, you know, there are going to be a lot of differences than what they saw before. There's probably going to be one direction that you have to walk down the hallway. There's going to be more hand washing or sanitizing stations. So we want to make sure that we're really explicit as school leaders, ensuring that our staff know the routine in and out, and that they feel really clear on it, and that they're able to turnkey that and teach that to our students. And the biggest thing when thinking about new routines is not just making them explicit to both the adults and the students, but also making sure they're not punitive. We will only add to our students' anxiety if when they're walking down the hallway, we say, no, 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 don't do that. We want to make sure we're just saying, you know, hey, bud, you're actually going down the wrong way. We need to turn around and go this way. And just making it very, again, warm, gentle, a way to reassure them that, you know, we're going to take care of them and try to keep them as safe as possible. I know even I am guilty at the grocery store. I'll go down the wrong way and then I'll panic and turn around and start going the right way. And so I think we've all been there, and we're all trying to make those adjustments and just being super understanding with both our staff and our students as we're trying to navigate what school is going to look like. And next, we're going to talk a little bit about self-efficacy. So here, you know, when we think about returning to school, even in a normal school year, we have this thing called summer slide, which we're all familiar with as educators, where our students, because they weren't with us for a few months, may have had a dip in their reading level, may have had a dip in their math skills. And so a lot of times, the first few months of school anyway are kind of spent trying to catch kids up. And teachers are going to feel this times 1,000 now that they have not only not been with their students over the summer, but now we're adding on a few months of school closure as well. They're going to be anxious to get kids caught up. And that is why we're all here, right? To support our students academically. So we don't want to deter them from trying to do that, from trying to catch our kids up, but we want them to pause for a minute. We want our teachers to really ground themselves. Why do I love teaching the content that I teach? And how can I just inspire my students to love the content that I'm teaching them as well? So thinking through the most engaging activities, especially for those first 1 or 2 weeks of school, highly engaging texts that really connect students to their lives and just feel super relevant. When we think about, you know, science, adding in those science experiments, things that students really, really like and enjoy about school. So just not necessarily not teaching the content, but taking the content to the maximum as far as making sure that students are smiling when they're back with us again, and that they remember why they loved school in the first place. Second, we want our students to have early feelings of success. So like I said, there's going to probably be some students who are struggling with confidence and things like that. And we just really want to make sure that, you know, not to say that we don't want to water down the curriculum. We don't want to make it easy. We want students to feel a challenge. But at the same time, we need to make sure as educators that we are scaffolding and ensuring that students are not feeling overwhelmed by the first few weeks of school and shutting down. Nobody wants that, right? And so, you know, not only thinking about things like differentiation and scaffolding, but also thinking about just the culture around grit and growth mindset. Many of our schools have adopted the mentality of, and one of the strategies that we oftentimes coach schools on is having a culture of yet. So, you know, not saying, I don't know how to do this. Instead saying, actually, you don't know how to do it yet, and giving examples from your personal life. We've had schools that have done really cool bulletin boards or had signs up around the school that talk about the power of yet. And even in texts and things like that, anytime you have a character who perseveres or someone in history who has persevered, really making that connection that this is someone who may not have started off on the right foot, but because they worked hard, they got there, and really building that in our students as well. Next, we're going to move on to motivation. So in some ways, there is a silver lining with COVID, which is students have had to be more independent than ever, and really celebrating that with your students, that they've had to learn how to, work from home, and just like all of us have as well as adults. And the hope is that anytime a student has had to be a bit more independent, that we can really use that as an opportunity to build that intrinsic motivation, which is basically just, we want students to feel successful and work hard because they enjoy it. They enjoy what they're learning about, and they want to feel that sense of success. And not just because either a parent is telling them good job or a teacher is giving them a good grade, but building, like I said, that intrinsic motivation for them. And we think there's a couple different ways that you all can think about the return to school, where we're really building that muscle or continuing to build that independence with students, and really having them take some responsibility for their own learning, using this as an opportunity for that, to build that responsibility up. So first, we're going to talk a little bit about process-based learning, which I always use the cheesy, it's not about the destination, it's the journey. That's basically what this is, right? We actually, the other day, were just on a call with one of our partners in New York City, and they were saying one of the issues we're having with our 8th graders is even at the 8th grade level, they will still not move on to the next problem or the next section of their work without calling over the teacher, and the teacher has to come and check off everything and make sure they got the right answer before they feel like they're able to move on. And we want students to have a little bit more of a love of learning, and be able to really embrace the process of learning when things are difficult. What do I do? What strategies do I have besides calling the teacher over? So how can I kind of build that sense of, grit within myself? And when we think process-based learning and talking to our students about the process of learning and what it's like can help them. So a couple of different ideas here, one of which, anytime we tackle a new task, a new project, a new writing assignment, really taking the time to plan out our work, writing an outline if it's a writing assignment, or just talking through the process of how you're going to go about your work before jumping in, so that you have a plan, you're equipped with a plan. And also, I think another part of this is reflection, right? So once students do an academic task, whatever it may be, having them actually reflect on what was difficult for me, where did I feel lost, how did I work through that, and building that kind of sense of reflection so that they continue to learn more independently. And last but not least, we want to talk to our students about long-term goal setting. We want to connect the curriculum, what they're doing every day, to what they want to do in the long term. And so there's lots of different ways we can do that. We could have students do a vision board. At PASS, we recommend, we have a goal setting model called the GROW model, which is essentially backwards planning, taking a big goal and starting to break it down into steps. Another thing you can do with your students is, and many teachers already do this, but doing a questionnaire so that you start to get a sense what they want to do when they, graduate and things like that. And then tying the curriculum into that. So utilizing kind of your background knowledge on your individual students to make those connections for them. Why math is going to be relevant if they want to go on and work at Google one day or what have you. So helping your students along with that motivation spectrum, which many of you pointed out in our earlier question, that was very important for you to rebuild that motivation for students. Now we've mentioned here the strategies. We've mentioned a couple on each of the factors, and we know it's not an exhaustive list. There's lots of different things you could do to support your students when coming back to school. And really the most important thing, again, just to tie back into this idea of assessing first, is you don't want to try 20 different things and have them only work so-so. Even if you only did one of these today that we gave you, or even if something that your staff suggests, you only do one thing to support your students with the social and emotional support, doing it really well is the most important thing, and ensuring that it's really, really targeted and strategic. So we just really recommend checking in with your students, getting that pulse check on where they're at, and then really addressing that thing in a very deep way versus doing, like I said, kind of a scattered 20 different things to support them, because there's lots of things you could do. But doing, I think, a few things really well is the most important. So now we're going to give you the opportunity to engage again with our chat. We would love to hear from you all. Are there questions about these interventions? And then are there other things that you would like recommendations on? We're going to talk a little bit at the end and how you can stay connected to John, Charlotte, and myself. So we just want to hear from you all. You know, what are you still kind of pondering? What would you still like support with? Because we're able to consult and offer that support. So feel free to utilize the chat. Kimberly said, do you have an idea of what a universal screener might look like? That is a great question. We're actually going to get into that next. I'm going to give you just 1 to 2 minutes. Okay. So continue to think through your questions. Like I said, we do have a Q&A. I think we just got another one. Oh, thanks, John. Getting some in the moment feedback. I appreciate that. It's always a little nerve-wracking when you're presenting on Zoom and you can't hear people's feedback, so I appreciate that. I'm going to go ahead and move us into the next section, just because it will address that first question that we got, which is around a universal screener. But we'll have some time at the end for more questions as well. So be thinking about some more questions as I transition us into unceremoniously into talking a little bit about what our universal screener looks like. Okay. And okay. So I mentioned this earlier, but PASS is an assessment. So we work for a social and emotional learning assessment company. PASS specifically stands for Pupils' Attitudes Towards Self in School. And we always say we are not a school climate survey. We are so much more than that, because you're really able to utilize our assessment to gain knowledge of those 3 barriers to learning. So student sense of connectedness, a student's self-efficacy, as well as their motivation. So we're trying to uncover those things for you all so that you can proactively address them with your kids. Some quick logistical things about PASS. One thing that I really like about it as a former teacher, I just think it's so easy to administer. I had so many different assessments that I was always juggling as a teacher, as an educator, and trying to fit them all in throughout a school day or a week or what have you. It was really difficult. So one thing I like about PASS is it's just so easy. It's K through 12. I know you all primarily work with older students, but it can be used across multiple grade levels. It's online, so students take it online. It only takes them about 15 minutes to complete. And ultimately, the nice thing about it being an online assessment is that as the educator, you're able to pull the report on how they're doing instantly. And here you can see that we have age-appropriate formats. So the older students are responding to more statements. Younger students have this audio option here, which you all don't work with younger students, but it's available for our younger kids. And then the power is really in our data. So we are a standardized measure. We're a psychometric measure, meaning that we have done a formal standardization with PASS, and we've teamed up with a group of psychologists to actually determine what we measure and how we measure it. So that is, you know, we feel really good about the insights we're able to give to a student's social and emotional well-being because of, you know, just the strength of our data. We want to show you really the bread and butter of what we do is the data we're able to provide. So we just want to show you one example of a report that we would give a school. So after your students take the assessment, you're able, like I said, to go in on the back end and you can see an individual student report. This is a demographic report. So this is actually a grade level and gender report. You're able to see, you know, zoom out and see a school-wide report as well. And really the color coding that you can see here is pretty intuitive, but essentially green would mean your students who are the most satisfied. Red, we would be able to pull out red, and amber are students who are perhaps at risk or really struggling with something. And we provide consultation on how to walk through these reports. But the nice thing about the color coding, of course, is just that they're easy to read. You get a lot of data on your students, but you're able to kind of work through that data and pinpoint the areas of need quite quickly and efficiently. And then a little bit about how we actually partner with schools. So first, I'm going to just reference this circle that you can see on your left-hand side here. This is what we call the PASS cycle. So we do recommend administering PASS 2 times in the fall and the spring. The fall can be your baseline assessment. The spring would be what you're working towards, right? So you want to check in on your students. You want to know what they're struggling with or who is struggling perhaps. And then as a staff team, you want to be able to make a plan. Like I said, we do consult and help with that. But we also have a fantastic intervention guide. It's all online and it has over 100 different strategies. So your staff members have access to it, you have access to it, and you can actually go in and start to pull out some of those strategies to actually address what's going on with the data. And then last but not least, you're going to assess again, and that's where you can do some goal setting, right? And say, these are some students that we really want to support, and make sure that next time they give the PASS assessment, they are on track. We're not seeing all those red colors. We're seeing that they're much more satisfied with their school experience. So that is what we do at PASS. And like I said, afterwards, we're going to give you a link to my calendar, and you can set up a time to actually have a one-on-one consultation where we can talk about your school specifically. Right now, some of the things we've been sharing with you, we wanted to make sure they were broad enough that they were useful to everyone. But the nice thing about working with us and partnering with us is that we cater our support to every school that we work with. So now I see the chat is lighting up, so I'm going to take a minute to just ask for questions. And if you want to come off mute during this time, we have about 15 minutes left before we close out. So let's go ahead and see. Oh, we do have one elementary school teacher who found or educator who found their way to us. That's perfect. Great. Okay. So I'm seeing Abby said suggestions for connecting with hard to reach folks. No internet, don't typically call back are welcome.
Happy to help if you want me to, Kate.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, when I first think about that, I just know that, one thing I talked again with my niece who was telling me a little bit about what her experience was like with school closure. She shared that, teachers had certain kids that they were in charge of checking in with. So almost having like a staff phone tree. And so those staff members, and I think for the students that I think are particularly sometimes tough to reach, I think it's ensuring that the staff member that's assigned to them has a pre-existing relationship and has a closeness with them. And I also know just from my own time in the classroom that I did have some families who didn't oftentimes respond to calls, but they would respond to a text message. So that was another thing that sometimes I tried a little bit less of a formal way of reaching out to students because a lot of our students don't like phone calls for whatever reason and are much more, I guess, open to texting, so to speak.
Yeah, and it's something I would add is definitely trying to involve the parents. So building that connection with whoever their parent guardian is, whoever's at home, so you can maybe get a better understanding of what their experience has been like the last few months and reach out to them in a way that's really going to relate. I love the text message idea, Kate. I think that's fantastic as well. The other thing about the universal screener is we've got kids now who have fallen off track and like you say, you've not been able to connect with them. That's going to continue, unfortunately. And the nice thing when you do use a universal screener like PASS will tell you which students are most likely not to attend school with a 9 out of 10 success rate. So you can really highlight who's at risk of not attending school and start to support those kids early on before they fall off track. So getting them before you can't contact them, get them now because they're the most likely to not attend school within the next few weeks, months. So that would be a big piece of advice I would offer.
A couple other questions that popped here in for chat for either Charlotte or Kate. Number one, is audio available for middle and high students who would need material read to them?
There's no audio for middle school right now. It's something we're working on, but yes, you can read it to them.
And another good one here, and John, we'll get to cost here in just a few moments, and we'll do that for everybody, so it's really transparent. is, do we have individual school clients or mostly entire districts? So I know the answer, but I think you can vocalize a little better.
Whenever we bring a new resource to the US, we always trial it with individual schools first, because we want to partner directly with those schools and work very closely with the teachers in the school to make sure we've got it right and we've got the process right. So we actually brought it to New York City first, and we worked with individual schools throughout New York City. Now we're working with districts as well. So we've done both.
Mm-hmm. And Addie had a great question. Thank you, Addie. If students don't have the internet or access to the online assessment, could it be read to them by the phone? Or maybe another question is, could you do it pencil and paper?
So you do have the option. You could. We don't do a normal standard paper assessment, but under these circumstances, I would say you could do that and then place their answers into the computer online yourself. That would be an option. But my recommendation is this is a great assessment if kids are coming back into school, even if it's just for one day a week. It will be much easier to administer that way. Jennifer, I know you mentioned being a pre-K through 5 school, and Kate offered a lot of fantastic interventions, and I think they do work for younger students as well as older students. But what we've been guiding our schools that do have younger students is definitely that connection piece. Try not to come back to school and be worried about where are they with math, where are they with literacy, we need to close the gap. Just take that first week or two to say, how are you kids? Let's just get back into the daily routine and get back into enjoying school and enjoying each other's company and being here together. And one very interesting thing about PASS is we do a lot of different questions that relate to lots of different factors that Kate listed, but one of them is attitudes to teachers. And you wouldn't believe over and over and over again, when kids are flagging red, they're flagging green in terms of attitudes to teachers. The appreciation they have for the relationship with their teachers. For a lot of the kids we work with, it's the only consistent, reliable relationship they have. So just rebuilding that connection and letting them know that you're there for them is really important with those younger students as well as the older ones. Oh, and John, one other thing I wanted to add is thank you for noticing how doable the interventions are. One thing we really try to do is we try to take SEL and work it into the fabric of the daily instruction at school. We don't want it to be a case of, okay, we're going to highlight 20 minutes at the beginning of the day to do SEL. It just be something that teachers are modeling throughout the day through the way they're working with the kids, the way they're greeting them as they come into the classroom, all of that. It should be really, really easy and shouldn't be extra work for your teachers. It's something they'll naturally do. John, did we miss any questions?
No, it was just the one question on cost, which I think we'll get to just down the road very shortly. And then can you expand on the intervention guide, which I think you're about to?
Yeah, I'm happy to take that one. So our intervention guide, I always say it's a really fantastic additional resource. So if you're already doing any sort of SEL programming or curriculum or anything like that, this can be supplemental to that. It's essentially strategies. Like I mentioned, the power of yet is one of our strategies. You know, those are things that can be done at a school-wide level. They could be done with an individual student who's struggling. But really the purpose of our intervention guide is to get schools kind of starting to think about what are some things, what are some strategies that I can do to support this data. Ultimately, that's what we're trying to do, is really utilize the data to actually make a plan for kids that are struggling, or if there's like some type of classroom-wide or school-wide issue that comes up. And so it's a really great, like I said, kind of one-stop shop. All teachers would have access to it. It's all online. And it's actually broken down into those categories that we talked about: connectedness, self-efficacy, motivation. So if you do have a student who you're like, man, I'm at my wit's end, I don't know what I can do to support this student with feeling more confident, or perhaps it's the motivation thing that they're just really have a loss of motivation all of a sudden, what can I do to help them get back on track? The intervention guide is broken down in that way, so you can actually go and pinpoint, okay, here are some specific strategies I'm going to pull out and start to work with this student on that actually addresses the thing that's coming up with the data. So it's a really great resource, and I think one of the best things is, you know, I was a former instructional coach, as Addie shared. you know, and a lot of times our new teachers, or perhaps even sometimes our veteran teachers whose social and emotional learning is kind of something they didn't get when they're in their own teacher development training, because it is a little bit on the newer forefront of education. You know, it's nice to have a place where you can actually tell your teachers, this is a place to go to actually address what's going on with the data. So our intervention guide is a really great resource. And I think that does lead me to my next slide, which is just going to be, we would love to continue to connect with you. We have demonstrations of PASS where we could actually walk you through some of the reporting tools. We can talk to you a little bit more about what we measure beyond just kind of what was shared today. And John is great and already put in, I have a link to my calendar, so you can actually sign up for a time now. We will be in touch with you. Like I shared, we're going to share out this recording with you, and you can feel free to share this with your staff teams as well. We would love as many people to, you know, get these ideas and strategies as possible. We're here to support, so we'd love to connect with you individually after this. But like I said, we're also going to be sending out the recording of this just so that you all have that as a resource for you as well as you're thinking about planning for coming back to school.
Great. And Charlotte or Kate, the question about costs and assessment and things like that, if we could just throw some
Charlotte,
figures
do you
up,
want to
that'd be
share?
helpful.
Yes, so our standard pricing at a school level is $5 per student, but I know that Kate's hoping to offer you a discount today, bringing that price down if we can confirm orders by, what's the date today?
Exactly.
July 17th.
17th.
It's Friday.
Yeah.
Does that even matter anymore? What day? No,
it's a very big blur.
Yeah.
So we want to give you time, obviously, to discuss this with your school and have an individual presentation yourself. But if you can confirm orders by mid-August, so that would be August 15th, Kate's going to reduce the price right now down to $3.50 per student.
Thanks, Charlotte.
And I think my encouragement, if anything, from that is because they are the experts right here. You see that calendar link there? I think from all the feedback, everyone can see it's a pretty fantastic resource, simple, that simple tool. It gets used most often. But a lot of times we can step back and look and we can get paralysis by analysis. And one of the easiest things that we can do to make positive change is really just set that next meeting and show some of the decision makers in your school, how can this help us get a little better leading into what is going to be probably the wildest school year ever in memory, and hopefully the only one like this ever in the future. So the easiest way to get in contact with Kate is just from that simple calendar link. Correct me if I'm wrong, Kate, but just by selecting a time, it creates a Zoom meeting. Am I right?
Yep.
So
yep.
Just like this. Yeah.
Thanks, John. Addie, anything else that you'd like us to address in our last few minutes here? Oh, I think you're on mute.
There we go. Can you hear me now?
Yes, you're good.
Okay, thank you. I believe the questions were there and we've answered them. The biggest piece for me was the question I asked, because I hear from a lot of folks that there are students and families who either don't have access to internet or they're not working online. So the fact that in the most dire of circumstances, they can be read or pencil and paper, I think is very important. I appreciate the discount and thank you for that, for doing this. And I like the fact that this is something where an administrator can get individual student information as well as school-wide. I think that's critical for administration and teachers. So if anybody has any questions, please feel free to contact Kate. And I thank you again for offering a little bit about SEL. I think that's first and foremost on everybody's mind. Mm-hmm. And I hope that this was beneficial for our participants. And I thank everyone for joining us. And Charlotte, John, and Kate, thank you so much for presenting and sharing this with us.
Thank you.
We're getting a thumbs up from Miss Parker. Thanks, Miss Parker, for the thumbs up. Yes, and just thank you so much to Addie. She's been a huge support over the past several months as we've been trying to navigate what is life like without conferences and the ways we used to connect with you all. So I just really appreciate you, Addie, taking, even with all of the the foot and everything that you've had going on. You've taken the time to really support us at PASS, and we just so appreciate you. And of course, everyone who showed up today, thank you so much. Sincerely, as a former teacher, as someone who worked to coach teachers, I know you all have a very tough job. And I know right now, as you're trying to plan, it's incredibly difficult. So just thank you for taking this hour today with us. We really, really appreciate your time.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye now.
Bye.
Take care.